There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. It's time for Friday Reads. I'm getting started a little bit later. It's early evening, 9 o'clock, because I've had such a fantastic day of reading. I used to be so anal about my reading totals, my monthly reading totals, and my TBRs, that the closer it got to the end of the month, the more I would make an extra effort to finish up as many books as possible. And the last day of the month was like just this reading marathon, pushing myself to finish hopefully everything that was currently in progress. And I stopped that maybe 4 or 5 months ago, but I did that for about a year and I kind of enjoyed it, but it's also ridiculous. So I'm kind of torn. But I did kind of do that with a couple books, maybe 3 books this week as it came to the end of the November. For whatever motivation, I thought my monthly wrap-up was going to be piddly, and I've heard lots of booktubers in response to Mercedes' videos kind of poo-poo the idea of caring about that, but there's also a thing called human nature, and some of us do, for better or for worse. So I did give myself a bit of a push and did finish, I think, 3 or maybe 4 books in the last 2 days of the month. I feel nostalgic. I started 4 new books today, and it just feels wonderful. And I remember how exciting it was the first day of each month, because sometimes I would start 10 new books at the beginning of the month, and it was just like a bookworm Christmas. The first day of the month, I was just so full of enthusiasm about most of the books that I had started that day that it just was a wonderful feeling. So I've had a kind of a mini version of that today. So I have 4 new books to tell you about. And this weekend I will be preparing my monthly wrap-up, what's the other one? Monthly haul. And I'm still thinking about whether I will just concentrate everything on longer, more comprehensive Friday reads, but that probably isn't a decision I will make until the new year, so I'll just keep things the way they are for now. You have seen many of these on my channel before in hauls or whatever, including this one, a newly translated novel out of Norway called The 16 Trees of the Somme by Lars Mitting. I hauled this last month, and when I had a free space today, I just impulsively pulled it off the pile. It's 400 pages. I hope I can fit it in with everything else I've got going on this month, but who cares about that? Let's single out the translator. Translated from the Norwegian by Paul Russell Garrett. This translation is wonderful. I love the writing, and the story is spellbinding. So as I said on my haul, it's about a young boy, Edvard, growing up on a remote mountain farmstead in Norway with his grandfather, who isn't very talkative. His parents died when he was a small boy, and there's a lot of mystery surrounding their death. Part of the mystery is revealed in the first chapter, and that's stunning enough, but apparently that isn't the whole story, so the rest of the book is going to be about that. I'm not going to give away, even though it's revealed in the very first chapter. I'm not, but I dare you to read the first chapter of this book and then be able to put it down. It's just really has locked on to me. So the grandfather's name is Bestafar, and I want to read you a couple of paragraphs. A short passage about the young protagonist, Edvard's parents. And this passage is about the last photograph that was ever taken of them and Edvard. My mother's and father's faces never grew older. They lived in a photograph on the chest of drawers next to the telephone. Papa wearing flares and a striped waistcoat, leaning against the Mercedes. Mama crouching to pet Pele, our farm dog. The dog looks as though it is blocking her path, as if it does not want us to leave. Maybe animals sense these things. I am in the back seat, waving, so the photograph must have been taken the day we left. I try to convince myself that I remember the drive to France, the smell of the hot imitation leather seats, trees flashing past the side windows. For a long time I thought I could remember Mamma's distinct scent on that day, as well as their voices above the racing wind. We still have the negative of that picture. Bestafar did not send the film for processing straight away. At first I thought it was to save money, because after this last photograph of Mamma and Papa, Christmas Eve, midsummer net fishing, and the potato harvest were still to come. It was not obvious at the time, but I think he waited because you never know how a picture is going to turn out. Not until it comes back from the lab. You have an idea, an expectation of how the subjects will settle, and within the emulsion, Mamma and Papa would live a little longer, until the developing bath fixed them forever. I'm pretty sure I'm the only person on BookTube talking about this, and if it continues to go this well, I'm going to be shouting about it and dancing about it. But if you have seen anybody else mention this on BookTube, please leave a comment, because I'd like to talk to them too. So this is starting out really good. I wish I was a younger man. I would stay up all night reading it. However, that novel would be in stiff competition for my all-night readathon with this one, Ma'am Darling, 99 Glimpses of Princess Margaret by Craig Brown. I started this morning. Look at that cover. It is fantastic. The writing is just gorgeous, and I am so fascinated by Princess Margaret, and have been since I was 12. This is a very irreverent look at her, and I'm totally fine with that so far. She was not a very nice person. I think she had a rough life, as much as anybody born in such privilege could have a rough life, but she wasn't a lovely person, personality-wise. She was a spoiled brat. And this book I've read, the chapters are so short, I've read 5 chapters. They're about 3 pages long. And I'm just fangirling, just screeching at the top of my lungs about Princess Margaret. I didn't know how terrible she was. What a snob. And I've got 93 chapters to go. I'm just screeching, but I want to share a passage with you. I hesitate a little bit. It's a short passage, but I don't want it to sound like I'm bragging about my somewhat encyclopedic knowledge of these people, the royals. But it's a short 1-paragraph chapter, and it's imagining Princess Margaret on her deathbed. She died quite a horrible death. It was really sad, even if you don't like her or the royals. And the writer here, Craig Brown, is imagining what might have been passing through her mind on her deathbed. So there's a bunch of name dropping here. So first I will tell you the people that I had to Google, because I didn't know who everybody was. Sir Roy Strong. Apparently he was a friend of the royal families, although he's quote-unquote betrayed them. He's still alive in his 80s, and he's publishing his diaries where his very unvarnished opinions of the royals are being published. They're not very nice, but maybe they're true. There's reference here to an afternoon tea with Peter. That's a group captain, Peter Townsend, who was Princess Margaret's lover from about the early 1950s until for a few years. Captain Townsend, Peter Townsend, was her father's equerry, assistant, and he was obviously military and not royal, and she fell in love with him and had a love affair. Toyed with the idea of giving up her royal title to marry him because her sister, the Queen, refused to consent otherwise, but she didn't. Tony is the man she did marry in 1960, a commoner, Anthony Armstrong Jones, a photographer, and that marriage didn't last many years before they separated, and then they divorced in 1976. Yes, this is all in my head. I've had known all this since I was 12. Roddy was her much younger boyfriend. When she was probably in her 50s, he was in his 20s or something like that. Maybe she was in her 40s and he was in his 20s, but I certainly try to emulate that part of Princess Margaret's life. And reference to them at the island of Mustique, which is in the Caribbean, St. Vincent and Grenada Islands. It's a private island. I thought actually she owned it, but no, she owned a plot of land on it and used to have wild, crazy sex parties there, many of them with her much younger boyfriend. So that's Roddy. There's reference to a slight or an insult that Dusty Springfield made against the royal family. I guess it was specifically to the Queen. Oh, sorry, this is one of the ones I had to Google. So I'm basically going through the list. So most of these I knew, but some of them I didn't, and you don't care. But apparently Dusty Springfield, during a live performance for which Princess Margaret was in attendance, made some offhand joke that was actually about gay men. She said, it's good that there's lots of royals in the house, not only Princess Margaret or something. And Princess Margaret was deeply offended and actually sent Dusty Springfield a typed letter for her to sign, a letter of apology to sign and send to the Queen, and Dusty Springfield did do that. But it was kind of a gay joke about queens, but Princess Margaret didn't. She was not amused. Reference to Lyndon Johnson. Princess Margaret and her husband went to a state dinner at the White House. The old queen is Princess Margaret and the Queen's grandmother, Queen Mary. Lilibet was the family name for Queen Elizabeth, because when Queen Elizabeth was a young child, she couldn't pronounce her own name, so she, instead of Elizabeth, she said Lilibet. And I think that was the name Princess Margaret used for her, with her whole life. And of course, her own mother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and her father, King George VI. The one that I'd skipped over was Croffy, who was the princesses, Elizabeth and Margaret's governess for many years, and then after she resigned, she wrote a kiss and tell memoir in the 1940s that horrified and scandalized the royal family that a servant would do that. So that's Croffy. With all of that, here is the paragraph. Yet perhaps in the secret chambers of consciousness she had her thoughts too. Perhaps her fading mind called up once more the shadows of the past to float before it, and retraced, for the last time, the vanished visions of that long history, passing back and back through the cloud of years to older and even older memories, to the warm clasp of Croffy, so full of do's and don'ts, to Sir Roy Strong's strange clothes and high demeanour, and her last afternoon tea with Peter, and Tony dancing attendance on her mother, and Roddy emerging from the sea at Mustique in his brand new trunks, and the audience hooting with laughter at Dusty Springfield's impertinent aside, and President Johnson steering her into dinner in the White House, his right palm lingering perhaps a little too long on her royal behind, and the old queen, her grandmother, reprimanding her for erratic behavior with a bouncing ball, and Lilibet's voice down the telephone reassuring her once more that no harm had been done, and her mother laughing and saying, "Such fun!" before giving her that pitying look, and her father on his final evening bidding her good night and see you in the morning. I think that's really powerful. The writing, and I think, it is, she was a very difficult, snobby person, but he's not totally trashing her. That makes me feel for her. So I think I'm going to really love this. And even if you're not a royal fan or interested in Princess Margaret, as a piece of writing, if it continues in this vein, it's stunning. And look at that cover again. Ma'am Darling, 99 Glimpses of Princess Margaret. I'm so excited to be starting this. Whew. All right. I also hauled this last month. This is a Native American novelist, James Welch, and this is his novel, Winter in the Blood. published in 1974. I received it in a gift exchange, and I started it today, and the writing is fantastic. So I'm going to read you another passage, and just read the first two chapters. The protagonist is a Blackfoot Indian in Montana. He doesn't sound like a very happy person, and he lives with his mother and grandmother, and he has recently acquired a girlfriend that he doesn't sound very enthused about. She was Cree, and that's a huge problem for this man's Blackfoot mother and grandmother. So just listen to this about that new dynamic in the household. The girl was no matter. She was a Cree from Havre, scorned by the reservation people. I had brought her home with me 3 weeks ago. My mother thought we were married and treated her with politeness. My mother was a Catholic and sprinkled holy water in the corners of her house before lightning storms. She drank with the priest from Harlem, a round man with distant eyes who refused to set foot on the reservation. He never buried Indians in their family graveyards. Instead, he made them come to him, to his church, his saints, and holy water, his feuding eyes. My mother drank with him in his shingle house beside the yellow plaster church. She thought I had married the girl and tried to welcome her, and the girl sat sullen in the living room across from the old lady, my grandmother, who filled her stone pipe with cuts of tobacco mixed with dried, crushed chokecherries. She sat across from the girl, and the girl read movie magazines and imagined that she looked like Raquel Welch. The old lady imagined that the girl was Cree, an enemy, and plotted ways to slit her throat. One day the flint striker would do. Another day she favored the paring knife she kept hidden in her legging. Day after day these two sat across from each other until the pile of movie magazines spread halfway across the room, and the paring knife grew heavy in the old lady's eyes. I love that. I can't wait to keep reading with this. So I'm just on cloud nine, bookish cloud nine today, with how well those 3 books are starting out. And I've also started an audiobook, which I didn't get very far into, but it's starting out really good too. It's an African-American novel called Queen Sugar by Natalie Bazile. And it's about an African-American woman in somewhat modern times, close to the present, whose father, I believe she was estranged from the father, so she's quite surprised when he dies and leaves her his sugarcane plantation in Louisiana. In the first chapter, she, and her name is Charlie, and her adolescent daughter's name is Mika, they packed up, left Los Angeles, and heading to Louisiana to take possession of her new plantation. And that's as far as I've got, but I'm enjoying it. And then just to quickly finish up about books that are still in progress, I read quite a few pages today of the Sanjeev Sahota novel, The Year of the Runaways, which I had to kind of put aside to give myself a push to finish off a bunch of books this week, but I'm so glad to be back. It's just rich. I'm not going to quote from it, but there was a long passage that I read about a mother and daughter going to a famous Sikh temple in the city of Punjab. And as soon as I started reading it, because I couldn't recognize what it was from the name of this place, I Googled it, found out it was the principal Sikh temple in Punjab, and then Googled a picture of it, and it's just jaw-droppingly gorgeous, and even went onto YouTube to find aerial videos of how gorgeous it was, and then read that long paragraph about the ritual the mother made to ascend the steps to the second level, which is where the sacred space is. And and I was listening to Sikh music, because the page before he'd mentioned a piece of sacred Sikh music, so I had that in my ear, and I had done all this visual video research, and then read this long paragraph. I almost became a Sikh. It was such an intense experience. Oh my God. Now I wonder if I should read it to you, but no, I've got enough quotes in this one. It was a gorgeous passage, and it was like virtual reality for me. So And I also got back to this baby, the 19th century Polish novel The Doll by Boleslav Prus. And still not very far into it, but read a couple more chapters today and absolutely loving it. I think this one, as I've said before, is probably going to be carried over to 2018. I don't think I'm going to have time to finish it. And I don't seem to want to be able to read it fast. I'm just, at the risk of repeating myself, I'm just savoring it. The writing / translation is remarkable. And lastly, I'm on the home stretch with Mavis Gallant, The Collected Stories, 950 pages. And I can't believe this, but she just got better and better towards the end of her life. These last few stories that I'm reading are all about French Canadians. And she wasn't French Canadian, but she was from Quebec. And they're just wonderful. And some of them are linked short stories, so they could kind of work as a novel. Just stunning. I'm actually hoping, I keep setting goals in Friday Reads, which I completely abandoned by the time the video's posted. Certainly by the next week's Friday Reads. So, but I would love to finish this by next Friday, or by next weekend, and the Sanjeev Sahota. I would like to spend some time preparing a video review of this before I go home for Christmas, so I'd like to get it finished. Alright, so it's been a fabulous Friday Reads. How about you? Tell me all your bibliophiliac news. Bye.